We've all heard the warnings about long distance relationships, right? The late night calls, the pricey flights, just that constant effort to stay connected. But what if we apply that same idea to business? What happens when a supplier is hundreds, maybe even thousands of miles away from their most important customer? How does that distance change the whole game?
And that's really the big question we're going to dig into today. Does that old saying, out of sight, out of mind, actually apply to the corporate world? Does being far apart automatically make a business relationship weaker? Or, and this is the interesting part, does it actually force companies to try even harder?
Okay, so here's our game plan for unpacking this whole puzzle. We're going to start with two competing theories, then look at a really surprising finding, see when it really matters most, and then we'll use this super clever direct flight test to figure out what the real payoff is for all this effort.
So, like any good mystery, we've got a couple of main suspects. In this case, they're two competing ideas that try to explain how a supplier should act when they're a long, long way from their key customer. All right, so on one hand, you've got fear. This is the idea that a distant supplier gets, well, nervous. They're thinking, hey, I'm all the way over here. What's to stop my customer from taking advantage of me? So to play it safe, they invest less. But on the other hand, you've got signal. With this theory, the supplier is more worried about being replaced by a competitor who's closer. So to prove their loyalty and build trust, they do the exact opposite. They invest more.
But what kind of investments are we even talking about here? This is where a really important idea comes into play. Relationship-specific investments, or RSI for short. Honestly, the easiest way to think about this is like buying a super personal, custom-made gift for someone. It might be incredibly valuable to them, but it's pretty much worthless to anyone else. In the business world, this could be building specialized machinery or doing custom R&D that only helps that one specific customer. It's a huge, risky bet.
Okay, so we have our two suspects lined up, fear versus signal. Does distance make a supplier pull back, or does it make them lean in and try harder? Well, a really fascinating research paper has the answer.
So before I reveal the answer, what's your gut feeling here? Which one wins out? Is it the fear of being taken advantage of or the fear of being replaced? And this is where things get really counterintuitive. The research found, and this is a direct quote from the paper, that suppliers that are farther away from their customers make more relationship-specific investments. Yep, you heard that right. The commitment hypothesis, the signal theory, wins. Turns out, distance makes the heart invest more.
And we're not talking about a small change either. This is a real, measurable impact. The study found that for every one standard deviation increase in distance, these special investments go up by a whopping 5.9%. I mean, that is a serious financial commitment and a major strategic move for any company trying to manage a global supply chain. But hold on, it's not quite that simple. This isn't some universal rule that applies to everyone. This need to signal commitment, to kind of overinvest, it gets dialed way, way up under some very specific circumstances. So when does this signaling effect get the strongest? Well, it really kicks into high gear whenever the supplier feels, well, replaceable. Think about it. It happens when the customer has tons of other options to choose from, or when the supplier's products aren't all that unique. It also gets stronger when there's less transparency, like a big size difference between the companies, or when there's no direct channel for information, like, say, no overlapping board members. So if you boil it all down, it's pretty simple. The more insecure or replaceable a supplier feels, the more cash they're going to splash to prove their worth. It's basically a big, expensive way of signaling, hey, I'm your guy, stick with me. It's a strategic move that's born directly out of that long-distance insecurity. Okay, but you might be thinking, hang on, is it really the distance causing this? Or is it just that these types of companies are different to begin with? That's a great question. And to prove it, the researchers found this absolutely brilliant real-world test, and it involves direct flights. So here's the setup. It's pretty clever. First, the researchers find a pair of companies, a supplier and a customer, that are far apart. Then, they wait for something to happen. A brand new direct airline route gets introduced between their two cities. Now, the physical miles on the map haven't changed, right? But the effective distance, how easy it is to get from one to the other, shrinks dramatically. So the big question is, what happens to the supplier's investment after that new flight path opens up? And boom, here's the smoking gun. After a new direct flight connected the two companies, those special investments from the supplier dropped by an average of 13.9%. This is huge. It basically proves the causal link. When you shrink that effective distance, the need to send those expensive commitment signals goes way, way down. All right, so we've nailed down that distant suppliers make these huge, costly investments to prove they're committed. But what's the actual payoff? Is it really worth it in the end? This is where we find one last, pretty unexpected twist in this whole story. So here's the real head-scratcher. The research found that all this extra money being spent, well, it doesn't actually lead to more patents or any kind of measurable innovation. So if it's not making their products any better, is this whole thing just a colossal waste of money? Just a really expensive way to manage insecurity? Well, the findings here are just fascinating. If you look at innovation output, things like patents and citations, these distant suppliers who are investing so much, they actually perform worse. But, and this is the big but, their business relationships last a lot longer. And maybe even more important, their future firm value ends up being higher.
And that right there is the big aha moment of this whole thing. The investment isn't really in the product at all, it's in the relationship. They're not spending all that money to create more innovation. They're spending it to buy trust, to buy stability, and to buy a long-term partnership. So let's wrap this all up. What's the big takeaway? Basically, physical distance creates a trust gap in business. To bridge that gap, suppliers who are far away make these extra costly investments to signal, hey, I'm committed. Now, this might look inefficient from the outside because it doesn't lead to more patents, but its real payoff is in building stronger, longer-lasting, and ultimately more valuable partnerships. And that kind of leaves us with a final question to chew on, one that goes beyond the boardroom. In your own life, whether it's at work or with family and friends, when is an effort that looks inefficient on the surface, like taking that long-distance flight for a weekend, when is that actually the most valuable investment you can possibly make?